أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We want to welcome our friends and guests in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today will be our final program for Black History Month. We're going to close out the month with another thought-provoking topic. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, aka Malcolm X, and Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin in focus. For today's conversation, we have three special guests. We're going to begin the show with a one-on-one with my brother Shaka Abu Bakr. The name alone should suggest to some of my conscious black folk that we're in for a treat. Given the limited amount of time we have for our first guest, I'm not going to read his impressive resume. We will share it online, inshallah. I'll simply note that Brother Shaka Abu Bakr is an educator, a historian, and a good Muslim brother with a special treat for us today. Without any further ado, I want to welcome our brother to the show.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, my brother. Good to have you on.
Alhamdulillah, good to be here. You know, of all those nice things you said about me, the one I accept the most is good Muslim brother. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, you're my good Muslim brother. Being the teacher that you are, you recently started a series of history-based presentations on Black men and women who have impacted history in very significant ways. What went into your decision to start this series, Brother Shaka?
Well, you know, last year, January 1st, 2020, I started doing just a little phrase on Facebook and on a couple chats on WhatsApp, you know, like today in African history, you know, January 1st, this happened, this person was born, this person died, or this event took place, you know, maybe it was the Sharpsville massacre, maybe it was the birthday, well, I know September 19th was the birthday of Kwame Nkrumah, which is also my birthday, so I couldn't forget that, you know. But that was what I was doing. But I was getting some encouragement from others, a couple of my fraternity brothers, my wife, they're saying, hey, you know, maybe you need to do something more. Maybe you know, some people suggested a blog or something like that. But my very good friend, very good brother from Senegal, Lamin Mbaye, his son Malik, who was like my son also, he said, Uncle Shaka, people need to see your face. They need to see your personality. You need to go on YouTube. And I'm like, YouTube? I don't know anything about YouTube, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, he talked me into it along with some other folks, and we developed the YouTube channel, and we decided that this year, 2021, we'll do a short video every day. You know, that at least that's the goal, a short video every day, you know. And one of the things we want to look at, too, is not just people who have passed away. You know, tomorrow begins Women History Month, and I plan to focus on women in our history. Most of them, of course, have passed away, but there's a lot of women who are still alive today and doing good work that I want to tap into. You know, let's call it a history in the making. You know?
Yes, yes.
So it's a lot. We'll see how that plays out.
Alhamdulillah. Well, may Allah Ta'ala bless you in that effort, brother. Now, with that being said, I believe you prepared something special for us today on Imam Jamil.
Well, yes, I did, and yes and no. Here's what happened.
Okay.
I started looking into the life of Imam Jamil, used to be known as H. Brown. And I said, you know what? A lot of this stuff probably can be found online. You know, some about his early life, you know, him going to school in Georgia because the school that he could see from his home. You know, Southern University was big and shiny, but it was for white folks. And so he ended up going to a HBCU in Georgia that, you know, of course, many HBCUs have a lot of money. So it wasn't quite as bright and shiny. And in his own words, well, you know, it's kind of broken down. That was for niggas. That's a quote from H. Rap Brown. You know, good student, dropped, but then left school, went to Washington, not Howard, went to Washington to visit his brother, who was studying at Howard, and fell in love with the atmosphere at Howard and you know, the conscious level of Howard, and decided that he's going to tap into that. You know, but one of the things that I like about the Imam, and I'm going back to when he was H. Rap Brown and coming forward. There was a speech that he did in Los Angeles in, I think it was 1970. And I remember the way he talked. You know, of course, I wasn't there. 1970, I was only 9 years old, and I was still living in Guyana, right? But I remember the first time I saw the speech, you know, and even on camera, the guy looks pretty dramatic, and he's tall, he's got the red hair, and of course, you know, as soon as he walk on the stage, you know this is power, right?
Right.
But he started talking. He's talking to the crowd, and he kept saying that you're chumps. Right?
Yeah, I remember that speech.
You remember the speech? Right. But the message that he was given was that, you know, no matter what we do, you know, the power structure in the United States set the bar, or to set the goalposts. You remember when you were in school, when I was in school, what we were told? We got to work harder and be smarter to be just as good as our white counterparts, right? But we do all this, so we achieved it. But as soon as we get there to the goalpost, they move the goalpost back, right? Or they change the rules, right? And we struggle some more. We get there, they change it back. And I remember him clearly saying, you know, if the white man offered us $1 million to bring all the rocks to him, we would go out and we would collect all these rocks in wheelbarrows, trucks, or whatever, and we'll bring all the rocks to him. And when he now has possession of all the rocks, then he would say, guess what? The new currency is rocks. So the paper money that he just paid you has no value, right? And it just goes, you know, so there he was in 1970, talking about this aspect of the American society. And then coming forward now, when he was arrested for allegedly shooting 2 police officers in Georgia, even though someone came out and said, I did it. Even though they said that one officer said, I shot the man who shot me, and the man had gray eyes, and I literally put a bullet in him. Imam Jamil has brown eyes, and they picked him up 2 days later, no bullet wound, no scratch on him. With that, they just moved the rules again. Now think about this, my brother. Imam Jamil was convicted on a state charge. But where is he being held? In a federal penitentiary. First at the Supermax in Colorado, and now in Pennsylvania, right? These are federal penitentiaries.
He's in Arizona now, but he is still in federal custody. Yes,
he's in Arizona. See, no, they moved him. You notice this? His family is in Georgia,
right.
But they put him in Colorado, then Pennsylvania, now Arizona, to keep him as far away from his family as it possibly can, and keeping him for extended period of time in solitary confinement, right? And this is a state charge, and he's in federal custody. Again, they moved the goalposts. They changed the rules, no matter what. You know, so, you know, every time I think about Imam Jamil Al-Amin, or think about H. Rap Brown, because, you know, for me, I kind of find it difficult to separate the two. You know, I mean, I had a life before taking Shahada too, you know, that, and some of what happened then is what influenced me to become Muslim today. So some of what happened to H. Rap Brown influenced him to becoming Imam Jamil Al-Amin, right? So we can't just push him aside, right? It's just like we talk about El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, but we also can't forget Malcolm X, right? And of course, Malcolm Middle. So with that in mind, you know, one of the things that I think we do as a people, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, is that if that person who is of influence, who is of an inspirational character, if that person is not directly in front of us, we tend to forget about them.
Right.
And we make that mistake. Are we making a mistake now? You know, thank God, you know, the people like you who get out there. I mean, you know, I can't remember, I can't forget the time I walked past the State Department on Constitution Avenue and saw you out there doing your one-man stand for Dr. Siddiqui, right? I was like,
Yeah, Father
whoa, you
Lord,
know, let me hang it here for a minute, right? The brother's out
yeah,
here by himself with a bunch of posters and doing his thing, right? And then, of course, there are organizations out here who are fighting hard to make sure that Imam Jamil Al-Amin gets the medical care that he needs while he's in prison, because we know that the system would prefer for him to just die, right?
yeah.
And also, and in the process, keeping him in the forefront of our consciousness so we don't forget him, because we will do that, you know, and we'll wait until he died, and then every year on his death anniversary, we'll talk about how great he was.
Hmm.
The fact is, let's talk about how great he is, and how can we as a people, you know, Muslim and non-Muslim, learn from him and continue to learn from him and create new and younger Imam Jamil Al-Amin.
Hmm. With that said, brother, um, Alhamdulillah, and I thank you for this remembrance, including uh, that uh, occasional uh, one-man stand that I needed to engage in, you know, from time to time on these different human rights issues. Thankfully, that didn't happen too often. I would have, you know, a few brothers and sisters with me, but never the number that we wanted for any demonstration. You always want more, but yeah, that was one of those memorable one-man uh, uh, declarations of resistance.
Yes, yes.
But with that,
But you know, here's the thing. Here's the thing, brother Maury. Even the numbers that you attract sometimes, when we take those numbers and compare it to the great numbers that we have,
yeah,
it's
I
still
mean,
a one-man show.
yeah,
It's still
and
a
it's
one-man show.
and it is, and it is sad, and I mean, this is something that we need to arrest within ourselves, that jihad within self. We've got to, you know, I often say, you know, when I speak to audiences, you know, large and small in different venues, don't wait for something like this to happen to you or to someone that you love before you
Right.
become concerned. And this is a mantra that I think it's important for us to repeat. Don't wait, especially for those of us who are supposed to be God-fearing, irrespective of what our creed is. We're supposed to be God-fearing, and we're supposed to believe in truth and justice. You know, we can't just say it. It has to be demonstrated. We have to exemplify our principles. You know, we have to show people what it is we truly believe in. And because the longer we hesitate out of fear, out of self-interest, out of, concern for, whatever the creature comfort or magnified issue of importance may be in the back of our minds, you know, the closer uh, this pandemic of injustice
Mm.
comes to us and comes to the people that we love. With that said, brother, you know, before we let you go and shift to our other guests and that conversation, I want to invite you to share some thoughts, some closing thoughts on El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X. What did he mean to you?
Well, oh my goodness. You know,
And I know it's a tall order for
instantly,
two
yeah,
or three
yeah,
minutes, but
yeah. Thanks for giving me the easy one, right? No,
mashallah.
but I will say this, that Haji, the biggest lesson that I learned from Haji is never stop learning.
Mm,
You know, never stop learning.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
because I gotta tell my students in the classroom, there were three human beings who occupied one human body at different times. And they all kind of give me this puzzled look, you know, and I said, look, there was a man named Malcolm Little, a petty criminal who went to jail and died. Never left jail. But that's his body did, but the body left with the personality of Malcolm X. Has a different personality inhabiting that body.
Yeah.
And then after the Hajj and the travels around Africa and the so-called Middle East, then you know, Malcolm X never came back from that Hajj. He he never came back from that Hajj. Malik Shabazz did. You know, so what I tell that no matter who we are, and how acclaimed we are, we still have a lot to learn. And the moment we stop learning, then we might well just throw ourselves off a rock. But learning is the first part. It's learning and then adjusting our behavior to what we've learned. And I think that was the great lesson of Haji. Keep learning, but adjust your behavior to what you've learned. So that's my short version. You know, for the long version, you know, look for the book that's coming out, inshallah.
Oh, you're writing the book on Malcolm, huh?
No, I'm not writing a book, man. I'm just messing with you, man.
Okay. All right, all right. You know something, Aki, the point that you made is well taken, the transformation and the three transformations that Malcolm went through. Um, I would only beg to differ in just one area of observation that you made, and that is that Malcolm X never came back.
Okay.
I believe that a different Malcolm X came back, and the reason why I say this is because I remember an interview. First of all, the point is well taken and right on point that Malcolm was a person who was in constant transformation. I mean, this is one of the things that is, as you noted, well noted, it was the most beautiful and the most impactful thing about his personality, about his being, that he was someone who didn't put limits on himself in terms of growth. You know, if something new came to him that challenged him, and he was truly challenged during the course of that subsequent break with the nation and Nation of Islam. Um, he had the courage to embrace it. The issue of Malcolm X, and the reason why I still continue to use Malcolm X whenever I
Mhm.
reference him and El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz is because, you know, there was a question that one of the reporters put to him when he came back from Hajj after writing that beautiful letter and signaling that he had had a dramatic change in worldview. The reporter asked him, you know, will you still be called Malcolm X or something to that effect? Would you still be known by Malcolm X? And he said, I will, you know, continue to be Malcolm X for as long as the conditions that produced Malcolm X continue to
Uh,
exist. You know,
okay.
so the upon that return, he was the combination of a reborn and transitioned Malcolm X and El-Hajj
Okay.
Malik El-Shabazz. You know, may Allah Ta'ala bless his soul, and I believe that his soul is being blessed in the most lofty of ways. You know, but
Well, you know, I'm going to take
go
that.
ahead,
That's
brother
what
Shaka.
point I'm going to take that point. I'm glad you shared that with me, right? But and that is one of the things that both Elijah Malik Shabazz and Imam Jamil Al-Amin share,
That's
that
right.
ability
That's right.
to
That's right.
transform based on their knowledge. You know,
That's right.
yeah, I think they both share that quality. I saw the same thing in people like Dr. Walter Rodney. You know, he was
Hmm.
able to make changes based on new knowledge and so on. So
Right.
with all those lessons, man, you know, we have a blueprint to it. I'm not sure why we're not following
Well, we need reminders, and that's why we have brothers like
it.
you And inshallah ta'ala, Brother Shaka Abu Bakr, we're going to have you back, Aki. We're going to have you back, and we're
Inshallah,
going to have
inshallah.
you do one of those vintage, presentations, inshallah ta'ala, for the Salah Media audience. With that, may Allah ta'ala continue to bless the rest of your day, Aki, and thank you for joining us. Inshallah,
Thank
we'll
you
have
for
you back.
having me.
All right.
Masalam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Now, we're going to have a video, a short video of the brother who we have been focusing a lot of attention on in this Black History Month 2021. Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin.
Look at an infamous murder trial tomorrow morning. A Black Panther turned religious leader and convicted cop killer will be fighting for his freedom.
Yeah, that's right. Supporters say the jury overlooked crucial evidence since this happened 17 years ago when Jamil Al-Amin was convicted of murdering a Fulton County deputy. 11 Alive's Doug Richards takes a closer look at their argument.
State of Georgia versus Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin.
Let's just look at what
On
happened.
count
Maybe
one,
you'll come to the conclusion that someone may have had it in for my father.
we, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
Carrie Al-Amin was the schoolboy in the courtroom, watching in disbelief as a jury convicted his father of murder.
Maybe he didn't do this. Maybe we should look at this again at trial.
In the face of the opposition.
His father is Jamil Al-Amin, Muslim cleric turned convicted cop killer, with a backstory steeped in race relations and upheaval. If Martin Luther King Jr. represented the heartbeat of the nonviolent civil rights movement, a man named H. Rap Brown may have represented its feverish impatience and its seething anger.
How many white folks you killed today? Bombs, churches.
Brown tore away from nonviolence to embrace the militant Black Panthers, famously declaring that violence is as American as cherry pie.
Burn Madison Square Garden down.
In the 1970s, as he served a prison sentence for armed robbery, H. Rap Brown became a Muslim and changed his name to Jamil Al-Amin. On March 16, 2000, at 10 o'clock at night, Fulton County Sheriff deputies served a warrant for Al-Amin, a missed court date on a traffic charge. A man who pulled up in a Mercedes near Al-Amin's house opened fire, killing Deputy Ricky Kinchin. Authorities found Al-Amin in Whitehall, Alabama after a 4-day manhunt and hauled him in to face a charge of murder.
Brother Jamil Al-Amin, we support him.
But just as many Atlanta Muslims and Black Panthers rallied around him 17 years ago, attorneys are doing it again now as they seek a new trial for Jamil Al-Amin. In federal court briefs, they say jurors overlooked eyewitness testimony that Al-Amin was not responsible for the shooting. Statements by both deputies that they had shot their assailant, though Al-Amin had not been shot.
We have enough paperwork and evidence on our side at this point to at least warrant a new trial.
Yet no judge has ordered a new trial.
This case has always been about the cold-blooded gunning down of two sheriff's deputies in the line of duty.
By the way, District Attorney Paul Howard declined an interview with us on the Jamil Al-Amin's appeal. However, he did send us a statement.
It says, in part, it is my sincere hope that the conviction handed down by a Fulton County Superior Court jury will continue to be upheld and Al-Amin will remain in prison.
Welcome back. Again, our focus for today is the legacies. Well, the legacy of El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, aka Malcolm X, and Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin in focus. We wanted to focus most of our attention on Imam Jamil, as this has been our primary focus for this year's Black History Month 2021. And given that this is the last program in this month, we want to continue to focus much needed attention on our brother who is still alive and imprisoned as a political prisoner right now in the state of Arizona under federal custody. With that said, I want to bring two brothers back to the platform two brothers that have been with us before, Amir Abdul Malik Ali and Imam Yusuf Rios. These are two brothers who have been guests of ours on a number of occasions. You know, those of you who follow the show, you already know the backgrounds. We're not going to waste any time. Let's just bring them on and begin this conversation, inshallah ta'ala, with our brothers. Assalamu alaikum, Imam Yusuf. I think you may be mute, Aki.
Wa alaikum salam wa
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I don't know if Brother Amir Abdul Malik is with us, but if he is, then we want to bring him on as well. Let's go ahead and begin our conversation. I know that Amir Abdul Malik Ali, he had an interview just before this one, and it could be that he is still connected with that interview. He may be joining us, inshallah ta'ala. We hope that he does. But for you, my brother, we are in the closing hours of Black History Month 2021. This is the final show in this month, in which we will be focusing attention on our martyr, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, and then also talking about the continued struggle of our brother Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin for his freedom. Let's begin with El-Hajj Malik. What did Malcolm mean to you, my brother, and how do you view his legacy in 2021, where I think, what is it, 56 years, I believe, since his martyrdom? Yeah.
They say 56 years, rahmatullahi alayhi. I actually have a personal relationship with Malcolm because Malcolm, rahmatullahi alayhi, was the reason why I took the turn to become Muslim. There's a lot of things that influenced me in becoming Muslim, but it was in studying his life and the excellence that he brought to the table, and the promise of transformation and liberation and concern and community. Those were things that were fundamental in me becoming a Muslim. And especially, you know, when it came to the construction of the family, and when it came to the construction of, you know, the community. I think that the legacy of Malcolm, you know, I've watched people talk about it from a number of different angles. I matured in my Islam in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was an imam right around the corner from where he did his speech at Corey Methodist Church, Baptist Church, or Corey Methodist Church. And in Cleveland, Ohio, you know, Cleveland, Ohio is a town in which it prides itself on its part in the liberation struggle. A lot of, you know, liberation activity came out of Cleveland. We have Imam Mutawaf Shaheed, which is one of the senior imams in the country. He was part of Imam Jamil's community. And we've, you know, and I grew up with brothers. When I came into Islam, I had a brother that was a mentor for me. And he was actually involved with people that were directly involved with Malcolm. So Cleveland was that place where Haji Malik said that was the, you know, type of environment that it was a direct connection. You know, people prided themselves in directly being connected to Malcolm. And so that shaped me quite a bit. I think that as far as the way that people look at Malcolm from a number of different ways. And I personally believe that Malcolm is a mujaddid, what we call a mujaddid in the Arabic language. I believe that he was a revivalist of the deen. I think that we don't emphasize that point enough. There probably should be some things that are written in that regard, but there's a lot to be said. One, the universality of the Brotherhood of Islam. The other issue is the application of Islam to every aspect of life as a transformational process. The struggle for justice and upholding of dignity. None of these things were so prominent in Islamic discourse, to be honest with you, when you look historically. Even in some of the movements from overseas that prided themselves on reviving Islam and so on and so forth, they didn't continue that justice struggle in the same way. You know, Malcolm was able to universalize the struggle for human dignity, and he was able to focus it, you know, on the African struggle. And also I consider Malcolm as a continuation of what was going on in West Africa with people like Sheikh Ousmane Den Fodio, who his struggle for justice, along with that of Sheikh Ahmed Baba, who was the imam of one of the greatest imams in history, but especially for Africa, who was actually enslaved by other Muslims. But he was enslaved by the Moroccans as they were fighting with the French, and that started the whole discussion around slavery and liberation and so on and so forth. And so you see that continuity in terms of Islam coming to uphold justice and coming to uphold human dignity, and it being applied to our lives, not it being something that's just restricted to our hearts and to our character, but it being something that is applicable to every aspect of life. I think that we don't look at Malcolm from the angle of what he did in terms of renewed educational studies at the university level. Dr. Oba Tashaka, he talks about that a little bit. You know, if it was not for Malcolm, I don't think that Black studies would have pushed in the same way that it had, or having people rethink knowledge in general. You know, and then I think that the idea of participation, you know, of community control, collective economics, the ability to access international courts, you know, a community that has a sense of sovereignty. You know what I'm saying? That we don't have to necessarily talk about an opposition to this system or that system, but if we're talking about what Malcolm means to us today, is to understand our role in the world on multiple levels, economically, legally, you know, when it comes to knowledge production. I think Black History Month, this Black History Month, especially in the Muslim community, there was an excellent presentation that we have Black Muslims that are doctors and so on and so forth. We just don't see them. They came out to talk about COVID. You know, so the highlight on that aspect of community development, you know, is very important. And from Malcolm's legacy, Malcolm had a two-pronged system, which we definitely have to revive, which is ourselves as Muslims internally, us that have an African legacy internally being united, and at the same time being united with the Ummah, and at the same time remember that we have to deal with, you know, the general community. That has been something, unfortunately, that has been forgotten, neglected, at times scoffed at, or considered un-Islamic, how Malcolm dealt with the Muslims that were of African origin, and he dealt with people of African origin that were not Muslim. And he found the sense of dealing and working with non-Muslims. You know, that's something that we have to continue. I think somewhere along the line, there was a point that creeped in that into Malcolm's program, which broke that in the Muslim community after Malcolm, or after El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, rahmatullahi alayhi, in which we became distant from the rest of the community. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, that kind of, I think, undermined the struggle for liberation. The other thing is that there's, you know, that we have to really put attention to or differentiate, and at the same time see the relationship between civil rights and human rights. You know, and I think that creates a different political platform for us as Muslims. When we look at the Islamophobia campaign, the way that ISPU had formulated it, they removed racism from it. Although they, you know, ISPU had a write-up about, you know, what was the suggested political platform for, I believe it was the 2007 election, or 2007 election. And so Islamophobia was supposed to be unifying political platform. And then they define Islamophobia and they remove racism from it, and they focus on religious discrimination, although they took from the civil rights movement, from the Black discourse on the civil rights, and from the Latino experience of a multi-issue political org or nonprofit type of org. And so I think that, you know, there's a lot that we have to revisit in Malcolm And I think from the religious side, from the cultural side, there's so much that we have to revisit, and we have to look at Malcolm as having laid out an umbrella, on how things are done. So many of us get stuck on this is the only way that we understand Malcolm, and we don't realize that the legacy of Malcolm. Some of us, I've heard throughout the years, they say, well, Hajj Malik El-Shabazz was like this and he wasn't like this, but they don't look at the fact that he had impacted other people. The non-Muslims don't look at Malcolm in the same way. They have a different relationship to Malcolm. He impacted them. So to appreciate Malcolm as a whole would mean that we ourselves also have to look beyond how we understand Malcolm and try to appreciate how other people understand Malcolm. And then somewhere we can dialogue on whether that fulfills respect and regard in terms of the legacy and whether there's continuity there. But if Malcolm influenced someone, you know what I'm saying, and they took the legacy in a different way, he influenced them. At least we should realize, as our Imam, which he is, our Imam, who laid out a blueprint for what the masjid should look like, for what our community should look like, for what our personal development should look like. For, Malcolm, a lot of times that what is not talked about in this time period, rahmatullahi alayhi, is what does it mean to be a Muslim activist? Malcolm gave us a pattern. There's so much confusion over this issue. You know what I'm saying? Malcolm taught us, something that is not easy, it's quite difficult. He taught us about how to be an activist and spiritually transform ourselves in action. That's a form of spirituality, which is not, because I came out of a Catholic tradition, I understand that there was that debate in religious, there's that debate in religious thought. The issue of being, spiritual in action or a contemplative in action, or contemplative in, where you remove yourself from the world, or you do without in the world, or you don't focus on the world. Those two approaches are there in spirituality. But we, for whatever reason, we haven't capped on the fact that Malcolm has taught us how to be spiritual in our service and in our activity to the community. And so there's a lot of things that could be regarded in terms of Malcolm's legacy. In Cleveland, Ohio, I'm part of a co-founder with Sheikh Abdul Tariq Rashid and Ibrahim Colvin. We have the Malcolm Shabazz Institute for Higher Islamic Learning and Black Liberation, with Sheikh Tariq Abdul Rashid heading that. But the idea is, it was to explore, where does this legacy operate, you know what I'm saying, in today's time, and also continue that legacy of Islamic knowledge with the Black liberation struggle in mind, because that is something that Malcolm continued. So I think that the legacy is something that we have to discuss, and what that means in today's time. Imam Jamil is definitely, an extension of that legacy. There's no doubt about it. If you look at his life, Imam Jamil represents what it means to be negated, your dignity in the system, and you're clashing with it. Because, they try to tarnish Imam Jamil's orientation or his CV by saying, well, he was arrested for this, or he was arrested for that, or he had this criminal history, that type of thing. But it's never looked at the fact of what does it mean to be a man of African descent in a system that has upheld slavery, and there's systemic racism. What does it mean to mature in that process? And what does it mean to oppose certain practices that are in the system? Maybe it may not always come from an individual on a personal level, but it's a systemic practice, which, it precludes or it blocks Black men from upholding their dignity as a whole, economically, politically, socially, culturally. I mean, Dr. Tommy J. Curry, who wrote The Man Knot, which is one of the best studies in recent times, which we can also say is from the legacy of Malcolm. He's one of the only people that I know that did his PhD study solely utilizing African-American intellectuals and thinkers and research. He did not base himself on his primary sources on European American researchers to talk about the Black experience. You know, he was exiled, pretty much. He got death threats in recent times. So he's in Europe, and he's doing Black studies in Europe, because when he started to challenge the way that the African a man of African descent, or the Black man, is conceptualized and looked at, criminalized, sexualized, you know, demonized, all that type of stuff, that became a challenge to feminism. It became a challenge to the academic establishment. It became a challenge to the legal system, because when we look at domestic violence conceptualizes the situation that the man is the one that is automatically the aggressor. And so he challenged that, and he says that no, that's not always the case, that you can demonize the man in that way. There's also bi-directionality, where women can also be aggressors. And so we see that the example is there to say that there is still a problem in the system when it comes to Black men or people of African descent asserting themselves and their identity as a whole in the system. When they seek definition, self-definition, there's opposition. So Malcolm taught us about that. Malcolm taught us about media study and the importance of understanding the role of history and media study in the construction of identity, and how it can be utilized for civilizational and psychological and even spiritual revival. Because if we're walking around thinking that Black men are a bunch of niggers, and that's something that we have in our minds, even if we may not say it, we can never be a Muslim community that allows the flourishing of people in our midst in terms of our brotherhood relationship. And this has showed up to be the case during this past year, was the George Floyd experiences. When the cases of police brutality or encounters with the police that were not so smooth kept coming up, some of our brethren were saying, well, you know, he should not have resisted, or he should have did this. And we're not necessarily talking about George Floyd. We're talking about a lot of the different cases after George Floyd that are manifesting themselves. Mm-hmm. And you can see the implicit bias. There was no concept of, well, he has constitutional rights. Oh, well, that didn't have to be escalated. It was an automatic blame. See what I'm saying? On these men, you know, and the fact that we have to say Black men, that becomes an issue. Like, you know, when we talk about white men, we usually don't say white men. We say men. You know what I'm saying? And so Malcolm taught us the importance of understanding how it is that culture is generated through media and psychology, and how eventually it feeds into policy, and it feeds into practical policy, like police encounters. You know, how, you know, the discretionary power of the police to read the law, how that is impacted and influenced by the psychology which was generated. Malcolm taught us so many different things in that regard that we still have not really harnessed of what that means in our reality of how to combine those things together, you know. And so there, you know, those different elements of his legacy.
Alhamdulillah, brother. Thank you for this thought-provoking opening commentary on the question of, you know, what Malcolm means to you. You mentioned something in your response that I had never thought about before, but it is an observation that is absolutely on point. Malcolm does indeed fit the definition of a mujaddid. I mean, it's amazing that this is so obvious, and yet, you know, I've never heard this mentioned before. I've never thought this before, and you know, and I've never heard it mentioned before, but this is absolutely on point. He did revive, you know, the religion of Islam in very dynamic ways in the hearts and minds of folk who were marginally Muslim. He brought, I mean, he was the conveyor for many individuals like myself and you, who began their journey to Islam through Malcolm. that observation is right on point. Now, given the fact that we are running down in time, and I wanted to get you, my brother, as a scholar of Islam and someone who has become well known on the social media platforms for the perspectives that you've shared on many different issues, you know, coming from the perspective of someone who has studied Islam as deeply as you have. I want to explore something very important with you regarding Imam Jamil. Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin is now in his 20th year of being a political prisoner, despite all of the circumstantial and real evidence, material evidence that points to his innocence. Not the least of which is a young man, a man younger than Imam Jamil, who has repeatedly, not just once, but repeatedly over the years confessed. Most recently in a trial that had nothing to do with Imam Jamil, and a prosecutor wanted to try to put him, I believe, into a perjury trap, and it backfired. I mean, on a trial, and we gotta, many of the folk have seen the clip of it, where Otis Jackson, aka Santos, under questioning concerning the incident that took place on March 16th, 2000, the day before the Eid-ul-Adha. That clip that we showed between the break, that was from 3 years ago in the lead up to the appeals hearing that was to be held in a federal courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia. I was there for that hearing, and subhanAllah, despite the overwhelming argumentation, that was in favor of Imam Jamil during that appeals hearing, and I'm not telling you something that I heard, or that someone told me. I was there, and I left out of that courthouse feeling very optimistic that, maybe, just maybe, these judges might do the right thing on the basis of what they heard during that appeals hearing. And subhanAllah, even though the judges came back with a finding of, yes, there were some definite violations that violated Imam Jamil's right. Well, there were constitutional violations. They came to the conclusion that they weren't significant enough that he warrants a new trial. So, we're here where we are 3 years later. The thing that I want to focus on right now in these closing minutes with you, my brother, is what is our responsibility as Muslims? What is the Muslim community's responsibility? What is the responsibility of Muslim leaders, Muslim organizations, conscious folk within the Muslim rank and file? What is our obligation according to the Quran and Sunnah to this political prisoners, Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin, and to other political prisoners like him? What is our responsibility?
It's funny that you say that, because I was reflecting on the Quran with regard to the captive.
Yes.
The person that is held captive or imprisoned, and in this case, really, the context is those who are, war criminals or war prisoners. You can take it from a number of different angles depending on the personal situation or case. It's very odd to me. Odd from the angle of forcing me to pause. Is odd in the sense that it breaks the routine. Not odd in itself, because we're talking about the Quran. It's not a ta'an. It's not, casting aspiration or something negative towards the Quran. But in the ayah of the Quran, in which Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, he says, وَيُطْعِمُ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. That comes in the context of Surah Al-Insan, the chapter of the human being. You know, and so Allah is telling us in many ways what it means to be a human being. You know, and then, you know, what follows that is that, you know, the issue of feeding them and taking care of them and doing that for the sake of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, which is, you know, the to give food despite their desire for it to the poor, the orphan, and the captive. You know, that's kind of how that is translated in meaning. The problem that we have with Imam Jamil's case is a number of different issues. One is initially it was left to his community. You know, I was good friends. Well, I shouldn't say good friends, but I would say, you know, I was a youth to Yahya Abdul Sabur, rahmatullahi alayhi. I used to sit with him and take guidance from him. You know, he was one of our elders in the community in Ohio. And he was part of, you know, the Imam Jamil Action Network. And it was because of him and even Brother Ibrahim Colvin, who's a brother of mine, that I learned the meaning of loyalty, because of how much they held on. And I'll never forget what Yahya, he told me, Yahya rahmatullahi alayhi, he told me, he said, you know, he said to the effect, you know, your brothers love Malcolm, said, but we have our Malcolm right now, he's locked up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Our Malcolm is locked up. So the responsibility is, one is we have to understand that the criminal justice system in the US has a lot of flaws. You know, the Imam Jamil case opens up the plight overall of what it means to be black and brown and poor even. There's even some European Americans are struck with the same struggle, but there is not exactly as systematic as it is in the black brown communities, especially not when it comes to when we start talking about the black community, how it is that the criminal justice system deals unfairly, you know, with this population. And so Imam Jamil's struggle in reality tells us we have an obligation to address either abolition or to remove private prisons and to ensure that there's some sort of justice that's set up in these institutions, right? And you know, when you start looking at the whole issue of immigration and what that means, it gets even more murky of how, you know, the criminal justice system or the carceral state, and even AOC right now is talking about the carceral state right now. You know, as a person that's representing, you know, certain communities in Congress. So that's the first thing, is that our obligation is to address that overall. Our second obligation as a community is to remove this concept that this is just a black struggle pertaining to the black community. It's a Muslim struggle. Because what happens, Imam Jamil, and many people have observed this about Imam Jamil. Imam Jamil, he retreated in many ways from some of the orientation that he had during the Black Panther experience. And he became more spiritual because the Black Panther Party didn't necessarily have spirituality to it. That's one of the reasons why a lot of them had issues. And this is not just my position, it's position of elders. When you look at people like even as radical as Don Freeman, he talked about the absence of spirituality. Right. You know what I'm saying? And so Imam Jamil, he changed in that regard, and that he added a spiritual component and a community service component. And so, you know, the reality is that that's not looked at in the system of how it is that Islam came in and brought a leader who was trying to really transform American culture from the angle of what? It's self-destructiveness. That's the same message that Malcolm was saying. And so we have to realize that Imam Jamil's reality has to be upheld. Of what does it mean to be really concerned for your community? What does it mean to want to see that the youth in your community are not killing each other? And our brothers and sisters in South Africa that are dealing with the gang stuff have to really have that understanding that we're talking about Imam Jamil, but we're not mentioning that Imam Jamil attempted on a number of different occasions to intervene in gang violence and to create sustainable communities. So we have to revisit the Whitehall Project. We can't let it die. It has to be rebuilt. But we have to be involved in ensuring that no matter what happens, that we are involved with the legal system as a community, and that we support economically. The least that we can do is support economically those people who can take up that responsibility. It becomes an individual, it becomes a collective responsibility, but an individual or group of individuals has to be assigned to be able to take the zakat money, the sadaqah money, to continue that effort of trying to pursue for his release. Because if the evidence doesn't support that there's a case against him, or if the evidence supports that there was loopholes, there's no reason why the system should hold him. And as an imam in the community, there's no reason why us as a community, we shouldn't hold that as a priority, especially given the fact that we're talking about, you know, what does Black Lives Matters mean? We're talking about what does justice mean? We're talking about Black History Month. But then when it comes to the actual work that is there, that's necessary to correct the situation, in this case is to address the situation of Imam Jamil, who's a byproduct of racism in the system. You know what I'm saying? Systemic racism, we don't have the same intensity. And so we're never going to be able to talk about justice in this state if we allow these types of cases to go by the wayside. And we're never going to be able to talk about what Islam means in the political front of political activism. If you know, how can we talk about Islamophobia, but then we're not talking about, you know, what it means to have an imam that was trying to pursue community building, that there's no legal evidence that can actually stick against them? How can we say we're against Islamophobia, and then we have an imam who's behind bars and the community just looks at it as, oh, well, you know, what can we do? So the responsibility is to uphold the legacy. The responsibility is to make sure that his name and his persona are not demonized. Like these ideas of constantly trying to criminalize him and not looking at the circumstances which generated those situations. You know, that's not right. You know, and understanding that Imam Jamil at a certain point, you know, his understanding of the system politically was different. You know, he looked at himself as sovereign from the system at one point in time. So he would fall under the category of, you know, a political prisoner. You know, so that opens up into a whole different set of discussions. But Allah knows best. You know, I think that the upholding his dignity, his legacy, and, you know, and making sure that we continue as a community to ensure that there's a sense of justice. You know, the system already cleared him in that way, but they don't want to release him. They don't have evidence, but they don't want to release him. That doesn't make sense, other than that he's being persecuted for his legacy in the human rights struggle. Just
and
like
on that note, brother,
others.
Just like Mumia Abu Jamal, yeah, absolutely. Now, on that note, we're at the end of the program, brother. I want to thank you. I don't know what happened to our brother Amir Abdul Malik Ali. Hopefully, he is all right, and hopefully, just the program that he was in before just made it impossible for him to join us today. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll have him back with us on another occasion. We'll also have you back with us on another occasion, Imam Yusuf Rios. So always, your brother Salah Khan is deeply appreciative of what you bring to the table.
We consider you our elder. We consider you our elder, Imam.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. May Allah accept. SubhanAllah, the brother, have you been there all the time, Aki?
Yeah, I was backstage. Oh,
SubhanAllah. My goodness. Okay, well, brother Sadiq, the engineer, we're going to have to, since our brother is with us, we're going to have to give him 5 minutes. SubhanAllah, I wish I had known you were back there, brother. I just wanted you to come right on when you appeared. But inshallah ta'ala, share some, you know, share about 5 minutes of thoughts with us on Malcolm, on Imam Jamil, and inshallah ta'ala I promise we're gonna have you back, Aki. You're one of the absolute necessities for a conversation with Al-Hajj Maurice Allah Khan. Go ahead.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Very quickly, inshallah. It's a record that African Muslims came to the Americas, the so-called New World, before Columbus. Columbus even wrote that in his diaries. Second, when enslaved Africans were brought out of Africa, enslaved, and the Muslims who were here with them, remember there was only 2 religions on the slave ships. They either had a tribal religion or they were Muslims. When they got here to the so-called New World, a common theme was African uprisings led by Muslims. In the first 50 years of Spanish rule, there was 5 pieces of anti-Muslim legislation because a common theme was African uprisings led by Muslims. When we flash forward to Malcolm and Imam Jamil, that is a return to that tradition. When you see so many non-Muslims inspired by Malcolm, African uprising led by Muslims. And Malcolm was clear. He wanted to see, Brother Salakan, he wanted to see the establishment of Islam in America, and he wanted to see the liberation of his people. And they went together. So he only got so far in letting us know how that could be done. Imam Jamil comes along, and he gets even more specific. This is how Islam can aid us in our liberation struggle. So when we read Revolution by the Book by Imam Jamil, that's exactly what he's dealing with. But that is a continuation of an age-old struggle, African uprisings led by Muslims. And we are still, we have not stopped seeing that particular dynamic. So here's Malcolm, a return to that tradition, and he got us so far, how Islam fits into our liberation. And then Imam Jamil, which is why he's in prison, got even more specific. So I'll stop there, inshallah.
Well, let me just ask you to respond to one other question, Aki. SubhanAllah. I want the same question that I put to Imam Yusuf, I want to put to you. From your perspective, Aki, what is the responsibility? What is the responsibility that Muslim leaders, Muslim organizations, any Muslim who considers himself or herself to be a conscious, committed Muslim, what is the responsibility we have to this political prisoner who has now been locked down for 20 years?
We have to do whatever we can to help free Imam Jamil. The system was correct. You know, when they talked about prevent the rise of a Messiah, the FBI, Malcolm X might have been such a Messiah, a African-American male Muslim they were talking about would have been the quote-unquote Messiah, right? Then all of a sudden you have one of the major militant Black Power advocates in the 1960s and early 70s become a Muslim, African-American male Muslim, you know, with his knowledge and experience of struggle. And then you come to Islam, right? He was next in line. He was next in line. He was the next leader that would teach us how to take this Islam and use it as a means for our liberation as a people. So it is extremely critical. This is a historical figure, and he has a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge that we need. And so Imam Jamil is a representation of the effects that Malcolm coming to Islam had on the Black Power movement, on the Black liberation struggle. Imam Jamil is like a representation of that, because he himself admitted that when Malcolm came to Islam, that made him and others look at Islam more closely. And so now Imam Jamil was next. And I'll never forget, Brother Salakan, when he came out here for Huey Newton's funeral. I'll never forget how the people responded to him. Not only responded to him because he was H. Rap Brown, but they responded to him because of his spiritual presence. He had a strong spiritual presence that the people here in Oakland really responded to. And it showed me that the people are ready to go to this next level, right? This spiritual level, the spirituality and struggle, and Islam being on the forefront of it. Imam Jamil represents that. And so we have to make sure that we do everything we can, with Allah's help, of course, to free him. He's that significant to us.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much, my brother.
Alhamdulillah.
Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to have you back along with Imam Yusuf Rios and Brother Shaka Abu Bakr. I want to thank all three of you for your contributions to today's conversation. May Allah ta'ala bless you and your families and fortify you and keep you healthy for the struggle ahead, inshallah ta'ala.
Ameen. Ameen.
Thank you again very much for being with us, Aki. I want to
Jazakallah.
conclude.
Sorry I was late.
That's all right. I want to conclude today's program with a reference to something that I saw part of last night and then the other part after Fajr this morning. Sheikh Omar Suleiman had an incredible interview, over 2 hours, a little over 2 hours, with Dr. Ahmed Osman, one of my favorite elders, on Malcolm. It was oral history at its best. Inshallah, I've sent out a link on my Facebook page. I'm going to continue to send it out on other pages I'm connected to. It's a very, very powerful interview, and he shared some things about Malcolm and about Betty Shabazz. May Allah Ta'ala bless them both.
Ameen.
That I was not aware of, and just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful oral history, inshallah. So I strongly recommend to everyone that they check it out. And the final thing I want to do is I want to make an appeal to my brothers and sisters in the United States on this final day of Black History Month, this month that symbolizes for me Black struggle on so many levels. I want to encourage my brothers and sisters to lend their support, particularly those who have expressed admiration or appreciation for the work that we do through the Aafia Foundation, but have yet to materially show it. I want to ask you, please, in the closing hours of this month, to make a contribution, not just to the Aafia Foundation, but also to another organization that whose emphasis is on political prisoners, another organization that I hold dear, an organization that I am, by the grace and mercy of Allah, one of the founding board members of, and that is the Coalition for Civil Freedom. So we're going to put a link, attach a link to this, the description of this today's video, and we're going to ask our brothers and sisters, especially today in the closing hours of Black History Month, to make a contribution according to your means to both organizations, civilfreedoms.org, Aafia.org, and help us deepen the struggle. And that also goes for our brothers and sisters in South Africa. You know, if you have relatives, friends, confidants in the United States or in any other Western capital that enables you to be able to reach out to them and encourage them to support an organizations like this, then please do that on our behalf. I'm sure that we have a lot of supporters in South Africa through this platform, Salam Media, that have appreciated what we've been bringing to the table now for the past year, since March of last year. I think that's when we started. So please show your love, show your support. And with that, our brother Amir Abdul Malik Ali, he's already there, man. He's been a strong supporter of us for years now. So may Allah Ta'ala bless him and you all. And we close out with our traditional closing, Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Which means in translation, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere, to patiently struggle. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.